You get some pretty strange calls when you're in the pest control business, but earlier today I had a house call that has me rethinking my career choice altogether. An old woman, we'll call her Nancy, called complaining of scratching coming from underneath her kitchen floor. She said something must be living in the crawl space under her house. I hate crawl spaces, and when I arrived at her house I knew this one was going to be rough. It was extra low, only about 1.5 off the ground, and by the condition of the rest of the house I was guessing there would be 40 years of cobwebs waiting on me. After I spoke with the old woman I walked around to the side of the house and stared underneath. I put my headlight on and began to army crawl under the house in the general direction of the kitchen. I tried not to think about all the little critters with twitching legs that I knew were crawling on me. As I got closer to the kitchen, the air became cold and dank, and from my vantage point, I could see the elevation dropped off beneath it. Sure enough, I could see countless scratches on the bottom of the floor, and beneath the scratches was some sort of hole about 4 foot wide. I crawled up to the edge and peeked my head over the top. What I saw sent shivers down my spine. I was staring down a narrow stone staircase that descended thousands of steps into the darkness. I couldn't see the end of it. I know that I don't get paid enough for this, but the curiosity was stronger than any caution I felt, so I crawled down the first few steps until I could stand up, and then after examining the scratches, I made my way down the steps. The staircase was old, very old, but very well built. Every stone was unique, but they all seemed to fit perfectly into their own place. They were kind of dirty, but strangely enough there were no cobwebs. Someone must have recently knocked them down. I kept walking and walking. I walked until my ears popped and my legs were burning. After what felt like an hour I had to sit down and take a break. The stairs were impossibly long and deep, and the thought that they might collapse underneath all the weight dawned on me. As I sat looking down the staircase in disbelief, I began to make a sound. It was footsteps, but they weren't moving any closer or further away. Somewhere down in the darkness someone was pacing back and forth. My heart was pounding, but I decided I would go a little further down and see if I could find out who was down there. I told myself that if I reached the moment where I'd be screaming at a character in a horror movie to get out of there, I would turn around and run back up. After a few hundred more steps I could see the bottom. There was a stone hallway down there, and although the sound of the footsteps was much closer now, I kept going. When I got closer to the bottom, I was walking as quietly as possible, and I crouched down so I could peer down the hallway. There was a large wooden door at the end of it, and I could tell that the footsteps were coming from behind it. There were no lights on down here, and it was getting to be too much for me, but just before I turned to leave, I noticed something strange on the door. It seemed to be covered in scratch marks, and as I squinted, I could see what looked like words that were carved into it. I tiptoed up to the door, and upon closer inspection I could see that I was right. There were words carved into the door. More specifically, names. I spent a few seconds scanning over them while the pacing continued on the other side. When I reached the second to last name at the bottom of the door, my blood ran cold. It was the old woman's name, and next to it was mine. As soon as I read my own name, the footsteps stopped, and a moment later, I could hear an iron latch being unlocked from the inside. That was the last straw for me. I turned and ran. I ran until my sides were in stitches and beads of sweat rolled off my brow, but I didn't stop. I could hear those footsteps slowly walking after me all the way back up, but every time I looked over my shoulder, I didn't see anything. They were always just out of sight. When I finally reached the surface, I shot out from under her house like a rabid raccoon, only to be met by the moonlight. Time had really slipped away from me down there. I ran to her door and frantically knocked and rang her doorbell, but there was no answer. Her car was gone, and I wasn't sticking around to see what came out of that hole. I hopped in my truck and drove home. Right now, I'm sitting in my kitchen with a six-pack, a shotgun, and my dog. I've been searching the internet to see if anybody has experienced something like this before. They haven't, or at least they didn't live to write about it. I'm scared and I don't know what to do, and to make matters worse, a few minutes ago, scratching started from underneath my kitchen floor.